This will be the last of our ongoing discussion of propaganda. We've been taking a look at some of the main ideas of propaganda as far as the overview of what propaganda stems from, thinking about the ideology and the base and the superstructure, the different types of propaganda. The propaganda and the audience is what we covered last time, and this time we'll be taking a look at propaganda methods. And again, this comes from our the handout that I had you guys download online, and so we've just been going through these terms to develop the language, and so this will be the last section, section 4. Take a look at propaganda methods. As we take a look at propaganda, how propaganda is disseminated, is perpetuated in the world, one way is through what is known as transmission, right? This is a process of broadcasting spin and propaganda to a mass audience to generate generally submissiveness, right? So the idea is compliance. This gets back to our discussion of soft propaganda, getting people to just kind of go along without questioning, without thinking. Entities can manufacture consent by pressuring news outlets to overlook and minimize unfavorable news. And so one way to do it is to control the narrative, to control the messaging is to pressure news outlets to only say certain things, right? To only put a certain spin on it. And this particular quote is kind of is an example of that control. According to a recent study by the U.S. Union of Concerned Scientists, ExxonMobil has spent more than $19 million to provide skepticism about global warming, funding think tanks, publications, and websites that are not peer-reviewed by the scientific community. So the idea to transmit this idea that there is a debate about global warming, that ExxonMobil, which would benefit from us on our addiction to oil, they would benefit from the messaging that, well, there's not a unified consensus within the scientific community when there actually is, right? And so the cartoon below is a depiction of George Bush and then ExxonMobil. Again, how much influence that private entities and private corporations have in the elections and the political process. This is George Bush speaking. He says, "I've been informed from a reliable source that this global warming is just nothing but junk science." And so again, the idea is, well, we have to pull that apart and think about where is the messaging coming from? What are the biases that are there as they transmit their spin, as they take their ideas and they change them according to a certain type of narrative. Thinking about a sticky word is a single word that remains in the hearts and minds of people because it possesses multi-layered images that are simplified to a single slogan, right? And so we see this often within campaigns where they'll use one word, but that word has ambiguity, and it's purposefully ambiguous because that way you can fill in your own meaning. What you think the word means is what they're standing for, right? So the big part of politics today is not to get too specific, not to get bogged down with specific policies, just to say, I'm going to bring change or hope, as we see with the Obama campaign, use those two words regularly in order to say whatever change you want, that's what I'm standing for. Whatever hope you need, that's who I'll be, right? And so using ambiguous words is something that political campaigns often use. A quote here that kind of exemplifies this. Barack Obama successfully stuck to words into the public psyche during the 2008 election campaign, hope and change. Both of these words carried positive connotations which the herd could easily identify with. This enabled the Obama campaign to capture the hearts and minds with abstract promises without getting bogged down in policy details. And so as we see words that are being used, ambiguous words, without any type of elaboration, we need to be a little bit skeptical about what they actually mean by that. And sometimes it's difficult for reporters and journalists to try to pin politicians down to specifics because they're trying to avoid that. Because once they get specific, then they start to become more divisive, and then people start kind of abandoning ship. And so they try to be as ambiguous as possible. So we need to kind of hold their feet to the fire to focus on specificities of policy. Think about repetition. Repetition is the use of a single word over and over. And the idea of repetition is if we repeat something over and over, it makes it feel as though it is true. Because after all, and to some extent, even though we're probably skeptical of politicians, in the back of our minds, we still kind of think that they're the authority figures, that they must know more. And so if they continually push something or repeat a line enough, then we start to think, well, it must have some merit, some value to it. And this quote kind of exemplifies how this is done, or it gives an example of that from the Bush administration. If you repeat something over and over, no matter how outrageous it may be, it will people will come to believe there's some truth to it. A good example of this is the claim that Saddam Hussein was responsible for the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. No evidence has been found suggesting collaboration between Iraq and al-Qaeda network, yet Bush administration officials repeatedly mentioned the two in tandem. As a result, an opinion survey by the Council of Foreign Relations showed that more than 40% of the American people believe that some or all of the attacks on 9/11 were Iraqi nationals, when in fact none were. And so if you repeat something often enough, it makes it feel as though it is true. A more recent example came with Trump and his tax policy. I want you to think about what word you're going to hear. I'm going to play a clip for you, and I want you to think about what word he's trying to use and repeat, or what phrase he's using and repeating to try to sell his tax policy. But something about repetition that he used during his campaign was something like lock her up or make America great again, and something that he continually touts even to this day is this idea of fake news. Whenever there's some type of news that is not favorable to him, he generally says, well, it must therefore then be fake, right? And then let's take a look at this more recent clip of him selling the tax policy that he signed into law.
This really will mostly benefit the middle class and jobs. Companies are coming in, they're pouring into the country, they've already started, and this will be great for jobs. It'll be fantastic for the middle income people and for jobs. It'll also benefit lots of other things. I mean, we're looking to, if you look at the whole thing, everybody's going to benefit. But I think the greatest benefit is going to be for jobs and for the middle class, middle income. Well,
So what we see here, where he continually repeated over and over, he repeated the middle class, he repeated jobs, right, that this is going to be something that's going to benefit mainly the middle class. When tax advisors and those that were looking at the bill suggested there was some benefit to them, some immediate benefit to them, but by and large it mainly helped those in the wealthy class. And we talked about that before in a previous propaganda lecture about how politics and the wealthy class are generally in tandem. And so, but the idea of repetition is, if you repeat something enough, it feels as though, well, therefore it must be true. Atrocity accusations. Atrocity accusations are picking out the worst statistic and evidence and then exaggerating them, right? And so as we think about the use of propaganda, we talked a little bit about this with our previous discussion on art, when we were taking a look at the writing, or the video I showed you of Robert Fuller Zach, when he was cherry picking very specific works of art from the postmodern era to say how bad it is, right? So this would be similar to if I wanted to make a comparison between Michael Jordan and Steph Curry, and I was putting together a YouTube video, and I showed all of the mistakes of Michael Jordan, of all of his misses and turnovers, but I showed only all of the great shots, the trick shots of Steph Curry. And the argument was, well, Steph Curry therefore must be better than Michael Jordan. If you were to watch that, not knowing anything about basketball, you would say, well, Michael Jordan must have sucked, right? So it's just a selective presentation of evidence, right? And so this piece of propaganda here that you see, the idea of the iPad being thinner than ever, right? Then we have the small child who is starving, to connect as though there's some type of connection between Apple and starving children in the world. But again, it's cherry picking, is selectively choosing, right, the what company versus these starving children to make that connection, right? So we need to be a little bit cautious about what information is being presented to us, and whether or not it is, selective or not. Dehumanization is removing humanity from a person to justify brutality against them, and we're going to see this a lot in propaganda. The idea is, as we take a look at how we see groups of people, generally what happens is those that are in power use propaganda as a means of justifying their power, and also justifying why those that are not in power are not in power. And generally they'll do this through forms of dehumanization. And these are some images that come out of the United States that justified why African Americans were treated so poorly, right? So as to suggest that they're just different, they're kind of subhuman, right? Is the argument between these. And so normally, if you'd see a baby and an alligator near one another, that's going to evoke some type of protective instinct within us. But this almost portrays it as comical. Or you see a little girl with a drink in her hands, and then a baby that's not in a bassinet but in a watermelon instead. And so using exaggerated stereotypes in order to try to suggest that someone is less human, therefore it's okay to then be violent against them or whatnot. We also see this when we think about feminist issues. We see this all the time within the media, how women are dehumanized, where they're only focused on one specific body part. Rather than displaying the humanity behind them, they only display, certain features. And this particular ad takes a look at that, kind of exposes that to some extent, where you have the Calvin Klein at the very center of the chicken, and then how Calvin Klein uses models and only focusing on specific body parts, right? Fresh young chicken, extra lean, 7% body fat, great legs, nice breasts, right? So the idea is connecting the chicken and the dehumanization of the chicken and exposing it. That similarly is what's happening within the modeling industry. Taking a look at emotional hijacking. This happens when subversive ideas cause someone's emotions to surpass his or her rational mind. As a result, the person's ability to make clear, rational decisions is severely limited. And that's a purpose of a lot of propaganda, particularly the black propaganda and the agitated propaganda. They tend to be try to hijack the emotions of people so that they do not think about it, they just immediately respond, right? And here's a quote to get us to think about this. Emotional explosions are neural hijackings. A center in the limbic brain proclaims an emergency, recruiting the rest of the brain to its urgent agenda. The hijacking occurs in an instant before the thinking brain has had a chance to glimpse fully at what is happening, let alone decide if it's a good idea. The hallmark of such a hijack is that once the moment has passed, those so possessed have the sense of not knowing what has come over them, right? So the idea is that they're trying to bypass thoughts, because if we think about something, we generally won't we won't react to it, right? And so an example of this would be Orson Welles and his War of the Worlds broadcast, which allegedly, according to legend, I don't know how much truth there is, people were running in the streets when he went on the radio and said that we were being invaded by foreign invaders, aliens that were taking over the planet, and people went out running in the streets, right? So that's a form of, if it's true, right, it would be a form of emotional hijacking where people were not thinking rationally. I wanted to show you a clip from a Netflix show that's actually quite interesting. It gets back to Derren Brown. I showed you a clip from him before where people raised their hands in the mall. This one he did just to try to test to see if it could be done, if we can emotionally hijack someone to a point where they would do something that they would never do before. And what he tries to do is he sets the stage for someone to see if he can manipulate this person into killing another person, right? So I wanted to show you a clip from that. It's kind of an extreme example.
Okay, here we go.
Why is it wrong? I want to talk to the auctioneer.
You did talk to the auctioneer and you helped him set these prices.
It's completed. It's just the...
Benny, pills.
Chris,
Chris, I'll call an ambulance, find the pills and bring them back.
Chris is enmeshed in a web of lies, and that's important. I need him to feel like there's only one way out when he's told to commit murder. My name is Darren Brown, and the question we're considering is simple. Can we be manipulated through social pressure to commit murder?
70 people coming in here. They can't see this. Take them by the knees.
70 actors will be playing out a meticulously planned and rehearsed scenario to manipulate this man, who has no idea he's being filmed.
Come on, guys. What are we going to do? He's a millionaire. He's going to make sure you go to jail.
This show is about how readily we hand over authorship of our lives every day.
Just give him one big push.
Can social compliance be used to make someone push a living, breathing human being to their death? Welcome to The Push.
So it's an interesting experiment to see what happens. If you're interested more in that, I recommend watching it. It's pretty intense. But it gets to this idea of, can our thoughts be bypassed by emotions, and can we be manipulated, and how can we, try to be more aware of how things are influencing our thoughts and actions. Disinformation. This is the deliberate spreading of false information with statements intended to manipulate the audience. This is the fabrication of false information to create spin. So one example of this would be from the food industry, where generally the misinformation that we have is what the propaganda is, that you always see food that is associated with green fields and gorgeous trees and a red barn and a farmer wearing overalls, right? So it gives this food it gives us this image that our food is coming from these wonderful, natural, kind of open, kind of range places, when in fact most of our chicken's coming from this big business, big food business, where they're locked in these pens where the chickens can't even move around because they're so squished together. And the fact that they don't have any windows and there's no lighting, and it's actually quite horrific conditions. But if they put this on the package, no one would buy chicken. And so what they do is they put this on the package because this is what we want to believe, right? Subversion. Subversion is when propaganda uses integrity and trust to manipulate the behavior of others, right? So, for instance, Mickey Mantle here is smoking a cigarette, and he only used Viceroys because they're richer tasting and smoother by far, whatever that means. But they're using his image in order to try to sell their brand. So using someone that other people would trust because he can hit home runs. Therefore, now he is being trusted to sell their brand, right? Whatever Viceroys are. Thought farming. Thought farming is when seeds of thought are planted inside the collective psyche to direct people's actions through subversive measures, right? So this would be a similar idea to Inception, right? The idea of thought farming is put an idea in someone's head that they're not really even aware that that the idea is there. They think that it's their own, right? Millions of people were killed in Nazi Germany in concentration camps, but Hitler couldn't have killed them all. Nor could a handful of people. What made all those people follow the orders that they were given? Were they afraid, or was there something in their personality that made them like that? In order to obey, the obeying person has to accept that it is legitimate, rightful, legal, for the command to be made of them. And so people have to willingly give over their agency in order to obey whatever command you're giving them. And so for them to do that, they have to then think that it must be legitimate. And that's where thought farming is, right? When they start to think it's legitimate, when they start to think it's okay, when they start to think that they're not giving over their agency, that they're kind of agents unto themselves, is a lot easier to then manipulate them, right? Here's another quote to think about. Tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. They are weapons that are simply thoughts, ideas, prejudices, to be found only in the minds of humankind. And so if you really want to have conquest, you don't do so with force. you do so with influencing the person's minds and thoughts, and that will help to influence that person's behavior. Well, one term I think I skipped over, I'll just kind of go back over this just a little bit here at the end, would be spin. Right? Spin is the technique in which language is used to push a biased idea or interpretation of events. Sorry, I can't speak today. It remains most successful when the audience is unaware of the spin and believe that their thoughts and behaviors are the result of their own independent thinking. So it relates pretty closely to thought farming. And the audience feels joy through conformity, right? So it's use as the technique of using language to push a biased or idea or interpretation of ideas. So this would be an example of a spin where you have Joe Biden when he reads the information on the swine flu, which this seems a little prophetic now, but it says, run for your lives, and then the White House spokesperson says, taking that idea of spin, he means jogging is good for you, right? So the idea is, taking the message and then branding it in a certain way, packaging it in a certain way. That makes it that changes the meaning of it, and that makes it seem as though it's serving the purpose of those in power.